Hello and welcome to New College Worcester. My name is Sean Randall. I'm IT support here at the college, and with me is...
I'm Susan Potter and I'm Head of Braille at New College as well. And it's really good to be able to record this presentation. I was educated fully in special schools, schools for the blind, and we all had two things in common. One was the uniform in every school, and the other was that we all used Braille. And so my first brush with mainstream education, as it were, was when I went to university. So we used Perkins Braillers, which have been around for years and are quite a staple of the Braille world, or were till recently. We used writing frames, and we had to do what we call dotting practice every week. And of course, we had huge Braille books, many of which ran into many volumes, and we had to carry them around and everything. I learned Braille at a young age and loved it, but I was aware that the size of my books did cause problems with sighted relatives particularly. I boarded at school, so I didn't have many friends at home, so that wasn't a problem. But the thing about the Braille books was that everything was very neat. You always knew when there was a new paragraph, you always knew when there was a new chapter, you always knew when there was a section heading. It was all neat and it was all uniform.
It's funny you mentioned books, because when I was at mainstream school, I had a large, or what looked like a very large collection of Braille books, but in actuality, of course, was just a bunch of very big, thick Braille volumes that, if you turned them into print, wasn't very much at all. So it was quite misleading, and that was quite sad growing up. But our paper focuses on the confluence, the join between Braille and technology, and how things have changed between between having paper Braille and that's all you've had access to, and moving on to having more technology. So there was a sort of seismic shift for me from paper Braille to technological Braille. I was at mainstream school. Braille was this big heavy thing you carried around in a bag or several bags, which no one else could access or touch. And I think a positive is the rigidity, the uniformity and the clarity. But the major downsides were the size and the portability and the time it took to get hold of Braille as well. So what we see now, I'm sure that Susie would agree with me, is such a huge variety of technology. How has that impacted you as a teacher, Susie? Would you want to tell us a bit about the equipment people are bringing to your lessons?
Yeah, well, until recently, we did practically everything with a course which was paper-based and Perkins. That was partly because I wanted to be able to train people up to take the RNIB Braille exam. I've always believed that there should be something for blind people to be able to have some sort of certificate for their hard work in learning Braille. We're a secondary school, and therefore the people I'm teaching have usually come relatively late to Braille when it's at its most difficult, when they're teenagers really, and they want to keep their print. So that's what I was doing. However, and then the coronavirus came along and we had to shift, and we had started to promote Orbit readers. Other Braille displays are of course available, but we'd started to promote these because they were a good price and they were portable and they were simple to use, which is really important. And we started with these, and so when it came to lockdown, that was really a signal to promote Braille by Notetaker, because we could get the students to read from their Notetaker, any Notetaker that they had. We've got quite a few students with Braille notes, haven't we?
We have, yeah.
And on their Orbit, because the Orbit wouldn't change anything that they were writing, they could write their exercises and send them to me. So the students that had those, we managed to completely teach with no problem, actually. Just a problem now because there are certain things like paragraphing, which is different on a note taker than it is if you're doing paper Braille.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things our students have to adjust to is the sort of the concept of a Braille window or a Braille terminal on a Braille device, which isn't a page of Braille. I think learning about Braille on paper grounds you in visual to a point. You see the layout, you see the style. Yes, things like font there aren't separate fancy Braille dots that look different, but you still get a sense of layout and how things look. What I've found working with mostly older sort of teenagers with the sixth form here, those people who are ready to go off to work, is this keen want for access to the material regardless of how well produced it may be. I certainly remember having to wait a long time for the Braille that I wanted to read. If I wanted a book, for example, a library book, if just one volume of that book wasn't available because another customer had borrowed it, I'd have to wait, and there was nothing I could do about that. Whereas our students today, they download those books, and you can share a download without actually losing any of that download, and that's a really, really good thing. You mentioned, let's go back to the orbits because they're quite new and they're quite simple to use. Do you think the range of devices, orbits, Braille notes, is that complicated things, or is it a good thing?
Personally, I think I can't get over the hugeness of range of devices, really, when it's quite a small pool that they're all playing in. And I do think myself that it's quite confusing. And also, there are some devices which I think do too much for the person who's reading or learning. I couldn't teach Braille, for example, on a Braille note because the Braille note will correct stuff for you.
Sorry to interrupt. Is this like a chicken and egg thing? You need to know Braille to use a Braille note, but you can't learn Braille on a Braille note because it already knows the Braille that you don't know.
That's right. That's exactly right.
That's it, isn't it?
Yeah.
It knows too much Braille.
It does.
That's a marketing slogan.
It's too intelligent.
Of course, they are aware of that. News is that they're doing things now with learning tables, a bit like when you emboss Braille, you can choose a learning table so you get the Braille at the right level.
Yeah.
That's kind of into Braille notes, so that's really good. I think market drivers for change in the blindness industry are very small and slow. So obviously this has been a problem in Braille notes for many years, but only now they're bringing in the solution. Our paper hasn't covered lockdown. We wrote the paper before lockdown really began, and I think the speed at which our students transitioned to electronic Braille was markedly sped up by lockdown, wasn't it?
Yes, absolutely. And of course, we're having to still, be very careful about using books, about using machinery that belongs to the school and everything. And some students now that they've used electronic equipment for their Braille lessons, want to continue to do that. The problem will come if they want to take the exam, because I'm going to have to say to them, there are some extra things that you will now have to learn because the exam is still paper-based.
And is this just a blindness problem? I read a newspaper article last summer that said that there are sighted teenagers taking exams who can't read analog clocks because everything's digital. So are we looking at a similar problem here? Are people so connected to their electronic Braille they haven't learned the rudiments of paper Braille? Is that a worry?
I think it will be. I think it will be a worry in a few years. Yeah, because I think people will be expected to go straight for the electronics because you can connect them to your phone, your computer, and everything. And I mean, that's marvelous. I have to say that I would not be without my Orbit. I love the fact that I can carry lots and lots of books and I can make notes and I can flip from one to the other. And frankly, that's a world that I could never have dreamed of, even not many years ago.
I'm going to rewind to your dotting practice.
My dotting practice.
Because this just boggles my mind. Sitting there punching holes in paper for a bit. With a stylus. But the thing that I wanted to raise about that is note taking, as in brief, like if you've got a number to write down when you're on the phone, or you know, an appointment to make, or a brief date to jot down. I've had access to laptops and computers for years and years, and nothing has rivaled the efficiency of the Orbit. You can pick it up, you flick it on, you type in your notes, and it's there, and it's in memory, it's safe, and it's accessible. You know, you can get a blank Braille document or a set of notes on the Orbit in under 10 seconds, under 5 seconds maybe.
That's right.
If you had to jot down the note with a stylus, like a phone number.
I've seen some very nifty people with a stylus.
But that's a skill, isn't it? That's a really
just
skill.
Point it out of your bag, and you can build up huge speed with those things.
It's impressive. Is it a dying art? Is it gone?
It is a dying art, except that only the other day I was talking to one of our Year 11 students, and they said that they'd had a go with it. They'd found a frame somewhere or been given one, okay, and they had actually had a go, and they sort of said, "Oh, miss, it was absolute torture, and you had to virtually, you know, think of yourself as upside down to be able to write backwards and upside down." But actually, he quite enjoyed the challenge of it. He does not have electronic Braille at all.
Okay.
So yeah, he'd enjoyed the challenge.
So it's the comeback of vinyl.
Yes.
It's Braille vinyl. Great.
I don't think it will. Have as big a audience as vinyl.
I was trying to sort of wrap my brains for using Braille outside of education, and the other thing I came up with that I did quite a lot of is making Braille labels, you know, for things like condiments and jars and things around the house. I still want to be able to know that I'm putting paprika in something and not, you know, cinnamon or ginger. And if I haven't got a block nose, I can have a sniff. But the quickest and still the most efficient way for that for me is using a Braille label on the jar, and that's not gone away.
Yeah, although, you know, you can get a very slim frame that you can dyno on.
Yeah, I didn't know that. I didn't know that. Okay.
Well, you could. I've got one.
Have you? Maybe we need to have a no technology day and see how it all goes. But yeah, the Orbit being a Perkins, essentially a miniature Perkins. You know, I think there's a lot to be said for that, isn't there?
I think the thing that has really captured that for some of our students, and I know that there are more advanced models coming out, but I think the thing that's really captured it for most of our students is that it's very simple. It's a reader, it's a writer, it won't do anything else, it doesn't do anything else. It's marvellous at what it does, but it doesn't do anything else. And that has really cracked it for a lot of our students that I'm teaching.
I think from a technology point of view, the entry level to Braille has been the price. You're talking, you know, £1,000 for the smallest sort of 10, 14, 16 cell displays.
Yeah.
And the Orbits come in and undercut that at half the cost. Yes, it's a bit noisier. Yes, it's different technology. There's been issues, you know, some of the mechanics are a bit off sometimes and people have to repair them. But the entry point has really lowered recently, and it's such a good timing with all the lockdown restrictions and everything else. Like more and more people are using Braille. People might not be reading Braille on paper anymore, might not be having volumes and volumes of Braille from a library. But I use Braille in so many situations. You know, I play computer games with my daughter, normally quite violent ones because she's a bit bloodthirsty. And she will drive and I will shoot, you know. But I can read things about the game mechanics on my Braille display rather than having to get her to read me numbers off the screen.
I do think the thing about you know, electronic Braille is that it has done a lot for the resurgence of Braille. I really feared that Braille was dying because, you know, there was a point where it was very difficult to get anything in Braille because everybody thought, oh, you know, it's in Word, so you can read it on your voice. You can listen to it, yeah. But I hate voice tech really, and I would much prefer to read Braille. And I did worry that, you know, it was going to die out, but I really believe that electronic Braille has sort of woken the phoenix up.
Absolutely, you know? reborn from the ashes. Yeah. We're in our last minute. Can I just one more question, very quickly before we have to finish? Does it matter that the power of producing Braille has moved away from professional expert transcriptionists to people making, what do they call it, quick and dirty Braille?
Braille.
Is that a problem? Is it going to change anything? Is it a good thing? 30 seconds.
Well, yeah, I mean, I know students who want to read books straight away, and sometimes they come to me and say, oh, I can't read this, what does this mean? It's some italic or something that hasn't come out right. But in the end, they get used to that. And I've asked a few students, you know, what do you think? You know, would you rather have things done really, really properly, or just be able to read something, download it from the internet, that's it? And they said, I'll download it from the internet. Yeah.
It's a new world, isn't it? It's a new old world.
Yep.
And I think the fact that we're sat here, generations apart.
We are.
Aren't we?
I'm old enough to be his mother.
Yes, I'm a very good mother. Well, Mum, yeah, thank you. I think that's our cue to go and have some lunch.
I think it may be, yes. Just one more point though. What is your best thing about your Braille and technology?
My best thing is going into my office and having a handwritten note from my colleague on the desk with some notes about what's left for me to do, and being able to read that get a picture of it with my phone and read it in Braille. To read what he scribbled down with a pen on his way out the door in a hurry has changed my relationship with my colleagues by making me feel so included. What about yours?
Yeah, and it's very immediate, isn't it? Yeah. Mine was, and I have to say still is, because my mum's a bit of a technophobe, but when I was at school, my mum used to just write me a little note every week, and it didn't say very much, but she wrote in uncontracted Braille and still does for cards and things. And I have to say, for me, that kept, when I was at school, that kept the link between home and school sort of very immediate. I didn't have to have an intermediary or anything like that.
It's a very personal feeling, isn't
it? My mum even had to go on the orbit this summer, so that's...
My mum gave up at letter F in Braille, I'm afraid, but there you go. Oh, thank you. It's been lovely to talk to you, isn't it? I think we haven't been able to do justice to our paper in this chat, but hopefully we've given people a flavour of what it's about. And long live Braille and technology, I say.
That's right, hand in hand.
Hand in hand.
Hand
cheers.
In hand.
Cheers. Where's that water bottle? Let's have a cheers.
Oh, hang on.
There we go. Cheers.